Why does it feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough? You get the job, you finish the project, you buy the thing you thought would finally make you happy, and for a moment, you breathe. But then that voice creeps back in. You could have done better. You should be further by now. Everyone else is ahead of you. You're still not enough. If you've ever felt this way, you are not alone. Millions of people carry this invisible weight, constantly chasing a version of themselves that always feels just out of reach. But here's the question. What if the reason you feel this way isn't because you're broken, but because of how you've been taught to measure your worth? Today, we're going to unpack this question through the eyes of Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. His ideas about self-worth, authenticity, and acceptance don't just explain why you feel like you'll never be good enough. They show you a way out. So if you've ever wondered why that inner voice keeps telling you you're not enough, stay with me until the end, because by the time we finish, you'll see yourself in a way you probably never have before. Let's be real. This feeling shows up everywhere. You wake up in the morning already behind. Maybe you check your phone, scroll through social media, and within 5 minutes, you've compared yourself to a dozen people. Someone just bought a house. Someone else is traveling to places you've only dreamed of. Another person is celebrating a promotion. And you're just sitting there in bed, staring at the screen, wondering why your life doesn't measure up. At work, it's the same story. You put in long hours, do your best, and maybe even get recognized occasionally. But somehow there's always someone who seems to be ahead of you. The colleague who gets praise effortlessly, the one who's always more confident, the one who makes everything look easy. And suddenly, your accomplishments feel small, like they don't even count. In relationships, that feeling cuts even deeper. You might be the one who gives and sacrifices, the one who listens and tries, the one who cares. But underneath it all, there's this nagging suspicion. What if I'm not enough for them? What if they'd be happier with someone else? Someone prettier, smarter, funnier, more exciting. Even in moments when they reassure you, that inner voice whispers, they're just being nice. They don't really mean it. And then there's the mirror, that silent judge you can't escape. You stand there noticing every little flaw, every detail you wish you could erase. If only I could change this one thing, you think, maybe then I'd feel okay. Maybe then I'd finally be enough. But no matter what you do, diets, exercise, clothes, makeup, the feeling doesn't stick. Even when the world tries to convince you otherwise, it slips through your fingers. Someone compliments your work, you brush it off, telling yourself they're just being polite. Someone admires your character, you think, if only they knew the real me, they wouldn't say that. Someone tells you you're attractive, you instantly think of the parts of yourself you hate most. It's like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. No matter how much is poured in, it never fills. And this doesn't just stay on the surface. Over time, it gets under your skin. It seeps into the way you make decisions, the way you carry yourself, the way you talk to yourself late at night. You start setting impossible standards for everything you do. You tell yourself you'll finally be satisfied when you hit that next milestone, when you earn that certain amount of money, when you get into that relationship, when you achieve that specific goal. But when you finally get there, the satisfaction lasts for a moment, and then it fades. You raise the bar again. The voice says, still not enough. You should be further by now. You should be better by now. Try harder. And so the cycle repeats. The finish line keeps moving. The harder you run, the more exhausted you feel. The more exhausted you feel, the more convinced you become that maybe the problem is you. Maybe you really are broken. Maybe you really are not enough. Sound familiar? Here's the twist. That voice inside your head, the one that tells you you're not enough, that constantly measures and critiques and compares, it might not actually be yours. Think about that for a second. When you were born, you didn't come into the world believing you weren't enough. Babies don't lie in their cribs worrying about whether they're worthy of love. They cry, they laugh, they explore, they simply exist, and they expect to be cared for just as they are. They don't apologize for being too much or not enough. They just are. So where did that voice come from? Maybe it came from the parent who only praised you when you got good grades but went silent when you struggled. Maybe it came from the teacher who said, you're smart, but you could do better. Maybe it came from the friend group where you always felt like the outsider trying to fit in but never quite belonging. Maybe it came from the culture around you, bombarding you with images of success, beauty, and perfection, telling you that unless you meet those standards, you don't matter. Over time, you started to absorb those messages. You took the expectations of others, parents, teachers, friends, society, and you planted them deep inside yourself. And eventually, their voices blended together until they sounded like your own. But here's the thing, they're not. That voice that tells you you'll never be good enough isn't the voice of your true self. It's the echo of someone else's conditions of worth. It's the leftover noise of other people's judgments, fears, and expectations that you've been carrying around as if they belong to you. And once you realize that, everything changes. Because if that voice isn't really yours, then you don't have to keep obeying it. You don't have to keep running on the treadmill, chasing a finish line that never comes. You don't have to keep pouring water into a bucket with holes. The real question becomes, if that voice isn't yours, whose is it? And more importantly, what does your true voice sound like? This is where Carl Rogers comes in. Carl Rogers wasn't the kind of psychologist who wanted to dissect people like lab rats. He wasn't obsessed with diagnosing what's wrong with you or categorizing your flaws. Instead, he believed in something that sounded almost radical for his time. People, deep down, are naturally driven toward growth, wholeness, and becoming their best selves. In other words, Rogers believed you don't need to be fixed. You already carry inside of you the potential to thrive. Like a seed that instinctively grows toward sunlight, he thought humans are wired with what he called the actualizing tendency, an inner pull toward becoming the fullest version of yourself. Sounds beautiful, right? But here's the catch. Most of us don't feel free to simply be ourselves. Somewhere along the way, we learn that who we are isn't always good enough. Instead of feeling unconditional acceptance, we absorb the lesson that love, approval, and belonging come with strings attached. Think back to childhood. Do well in school, you're praised. Fail, you're scolded. Look a certain way, you're admired. Don't, you're ignored. Act agreeable, you're loved. Push back, you're punished. These subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, messages teach us something powerful. Love is conditional. Your worth depends on what you do, how you act, how you look, or how you measure up to someone else's expectations. Rogers called these conditions of worth. It's the idea that you're only valuable when you meet certain standards. And those standards usually aren't chosen by you. They're handed down by parents, teachers, friends, society, culture, media, everyone who told you, directly or indirectly, you'll matter when. When you're thinner, when you're smarter, when you're more successful, when you're more obedient. When you're less emotional, when you stop being too much of this or not enough of that. At first, these conditions shape your behavior. You want to be loved, so you comply. You want to be accepted, so you perform. But over time, they shape something deeper, your very sense of self. Instead of living as your real self, the messy, complex, authentic you start constructing a mask. A polished, filtered, carefully curated version of yourself designed to win approval. This is what Rogers called the ideal self. On the surface, this seems harmless. After all, who doesn't want to be the best version of themselves? But Rogers pointed out a dangerous trap. The more you chase this ideal self, the more disconnected you become from your real self. Imagine constantly auditioning for a role in your own life, never sure if you'll be cast. Imagine wearing a mask so long that you start forgetting what your real face even looks like. That's what it feels like to live under conditions of worth. And here's the heartbreaking part. That's where the pain of never good enough is born. Because no matter how much you achieve, the mask is never satisfied. No matter how hard you try, the gap between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be never closes. The ideal self keeps moving the finish line, always demanding more. You ace the exam, but someone else scored higher. You land the job, but now you're stressed about proving yourself. You lose the weight, but the mirror still feels unkind. You're loved by someone, but deep down you're terrified they'll leave if they ever see the real you. This gap between the real self and the ideal self creates a constant state of inner conflict. Rogers called this incongruence, the painful mismatch between who you truly are and who you feel you should be. Think of incongruence like a splinter in the soul. It irritates everything. It makes you restless, anxious, insecure. It makes you feel like no matter how hard you try, you can't get comfortable in your own skin. So let's pause here, because this is a turning point. If the real problem isn't that you're actually lacking, if the real problem is that you've been forced to live by borrowed conditions of worth, then what does that mean for you? It means the endless cycle of not enough isn't proof that you're broken. It's proof that you've been taught to measure yourself with the wrong ruler. It means the weight you've been carrying doesn't belong entirely to you. It's the weight of everyone else's expectations that you've mistaken for your own. It means that the voice in your head, the one saying you'll never be enough, might not be your authentic voice at all. And if that's true, if you're not broken, if you're simply misaligned, then there's hope, because alignment can be restored. The gap can be closed, the splinter can be removed, but how? To answer that, we need to look at the root of this endless hunger for worth, and how Rogers believed you could finally step off the treadmill of never enough. Here's the payoff. That nagging sense that you'll never be good enough. It isn't proof that you're broken. It isn't a secret flaw no one else has. It's the natural consequence of living inside the gap between two versions of yourself. The real self, who you actually are right now. The ideal self, who you think you have to be to deserve love, respect, and belonging. Carl Rogers wasn't being poetic when he described this. He was being precise. He saw again and again that when the distance between those two selves grows too wide, people begin to suffer. Think about it like this. It's like running on a treadmill. No matter how fast you run, the finish line keeps moving away. You sprint harder, sweat more, exhaust yourself, but you never actually arrive. That's the hidden cost of chasing the ideal self. And here's why that treadmill feels so brutal. Achievements don't satisfy. You finally land the job, the degree, the house, the partner, and instead of feeling full, you feel temporary relief, almost like scratching an itch. But within hours, days, or weeks, the dissatisfaction creeps back in. Compliments don't stick. Someone tells you you're smart, attractive, talented, but the words bounce off like rain hitting glass. Deep down, you don't trust them, because your inner critic whispers, if they really knew the truth about you, they wouldn't say that. Relationships feel fragile. Even if someone loves you, it's hard to believe it's unconditional. You wonder if they'd still stay if you gained weight, lost your job, got sick, or stopped being so agreeable. Love feels temporary, contingent, breakable. Why? Because none of it, not the praise, not the success, not the affection, touches the real wound. The wound is this: you don't feel worthy just as you are. And so the treadmill runs on. Every victory feels fleeting. Every compliment feels hollow. Every relationship feels like it could be pulled away at any moment. Here's the paradox. The harder you chase worthiness, the more unworthy you feel, because each attempt reinforces the lie that your value has to be earned. Pause with me here. Let's zoom out. This isn't just your story. It's the human story. Think about how modern life fuels this gap. Social media blasts you with curated perfection, reminding you of who you should be. Schools and workplaces reward performance, not authenticity. Even in families, love often feels tied to achievement or obedience. No wonder so many of us feel like frauds, imposters, or disappointments waiting to happen. But here's where the insight sharpens into something hopeful. If the cause of never enough is this gap between the real self and the ideal self, then the solution isn't found in more hustle, more approval, more achievements. It's found in closing that gap. That means beginning to accept, respect, and even love the person you are right now, before the promotion, before the makeover, before you've proven anything. And this isn't some shallow self-help slogan. It's deeper. Because when you actually move toward your real self, something shifts. The treadmill slows. Your shoulders drop. For the first time, you glimpse the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to run forever. And let me be clear, this doesn't mean you stop growing. It doesn't mean you stop caring about your goals, your health, or your dreams. It means the engine of your growth changes. Instead of running from shame, you move toward wholeness. Instead of trying to prove your worth, you begin to live it. That's the radical reframe Carl Rogers offered, and it's the doorway out of the never enough trap. But of course, that leads to the hardest, most important question of all. If you've spent years, maybe decades, measuring yourself against an ideal self, How do you begin to close the gap? How do you unlearn those conditions of worth that were drilled into you since childhood? That's where we're headed next. If this is connecting with you right now, if you're starting to see yourself in a new light, pause for a moment and hit that like button. Not for me, but as a small reminder to yourself that you're choosing growth today. And while you're at it, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what we're doing here isn't just about psychology theories. It's about building a space where you can return every week to feel seen, understood, and challenged in the best way. So take that step now. Join this community of people who are done performing and ready to live authentically. Carl Rogers' insight was simple but transformative. The way to heal that feeling of never being enough doesn't come from chasing more achievements, fixing flaws, or impressing the right people. It begins with something deeper, something most of us never truly give ourselves. He called it unconditional, positive regard. Now let's pause for a second. What does that mean in everyday language? It means being valued, accepted, and loved. Not for what you do, not for what you look like, not for how perfectly you meet someone's expectations, but simply for being who you are. That's it. That's the foundation. As children, all of us crave this from our parents. We want to feel that no matter how many times we stumble, no matter how badly we mess up, we're still wanted, still loved, still seen. When a parent communicates, "I love you whether you win or lose, whether you shine or fail," that child grows with a sense of wholeness. But when love feels conditional, when it's given only if you behave a certain way, achieve a certain grade, or present a certain version of yourself, then a wound forms. We internalize the belief that our worth is fragile, that it can be revoked at any moment, and so we adapt. We perform. We hide. We construct masks to keep that conditional approval flowing. Here's the problem. Many of us never outgrow this. As adults, we keep chasing the same conditional approval, if just in different forms, from bosses, from partners, from friends, from strangers on the internet. We crave someone to look at us and say, "You're good enough." But the truth, the most important person who needs to give you that unconditional regard is you. That's the turning point Rogers was pointing toward. Healing doesn't begin with waiting for others to accept you. Healing begins the moment you start practicing unconditional, positive regard toward yourself. But what does that actually look like in practice? Let's make this real. Responding with compassion instead of criticism. Every time you catch yourself spiraling into self-criticism, "I'm not smart enough, I'll never succeed, no one could love me as I am," you have a choice. Most of us double down on punishment. We think, if I'm hard on myself, maybe I'll improve. But punishment doesn't heal. It only deepens the wound. Compassion, on the other hand, changes the game. Imagine talking to yourself the way you would to a friend you care about. Instead of, "You're pathetic for failing," it becomes, "You gave it your best, and even if it didn't work out, your worth hasn't changed." That shift sounds small, but it's revolutionary. Setting boundaries with conditional people. The truth is, some people in your life may only know how to value you under conditions. Maybe it's the friend who disappears when you stop being fun or useful. Maybe it's the partner who withholds affection unless you meet their standards. Maybe it's a family member who always reminds you that you're not living up to their expectations. Rogers would argue, these relationships reinforce the false belief that you're never enough. Breaking free means protecting your energy. It means creating space away from people who make your worth feel conditional, and moving toward relationships where you can be messy, imperfect, and still loved. That doesn't mean cutting everyone off, but it does mean drawing a line. I won't keep performing just to be tolerated. I deserve to exist as myself, not as someone else's idea of me. Experimenting with authenticity. And then comes the hardest but most liberating practice, showing up as your authentic self. Authenticity is risky because it feels like you're stepping on stage without a costume, but every time you let yourself be real, saying what you actually think, expressing what you truly feel, showing what you actually want, you begin to close the gap between your real self and the ideal self. And something powerful happens when you do this. The fear of rejection doesn't disappear, but the weight of pretending begins to lift. You realize that yes, some people may not like the real you, but those who stay, those who love you even when you're unpolished, That love is deeper than anything performance could buy. So let's zoom out. Every act of self-compassion, every boundary you set, every authentic choice you make, these are not just random acts of self-care. They are acts of healing. They shrink the distance between the real you and the ideal you. They restore what Rogers believed you were always meant to have, the freedom to exist without conditions. And here's the thing, once you begin practicing this kind of self-acceptance, something shifts inside you. The world doesn't change overnight. Your challenges, your relationships, your ambitions all remain, but your orientation toward them does. You stop running on the treadmill of, someday I'll be enough. You step off, you stand still, you breathe. That's where healing begins. And if this is resonating with you, if you're starting to see yourself differently, maybe even for the first time, then I want you to pause for a second. Hit the like button, subscribe, turn on notifications. Not just because it helps the channel, but because what we're building here is a space where these conversations can happen openly, honestly, without shame. A space where we unpack the psychology of being human and explore how to live with more wholeness. But here's the twist. Carl Rogers believed there's still one more mindset shift that makes all of this stick. Without it, self-acceptance often slips through our fingers. It's the piece that turns self-compassion into lasting transformation. And that's where we're heading next. We've gone deep into the theory, the gap between your real and ideal self, the trap of never enough, and Rogers' radical idea that worth is inherent, not earned. But here's the thing, insights don't change your life unless they make their way into your daily habits. Knowing this stuff is one thing, living it is another. And living it out doesn't require perfection. It requires practice. Small, consistent steps that begin to reshape how you see yourself and how you move through the world. Let's break it down into real, tangible practices you can start weaving into your life. Journal your real versus ideal self. This is where it all begins. Awareness. Most of us carry our ideal self around unconsciously, a collage of expectations from parents, teachers, culture, social media, and even our own perfectionistic standards. We compare ourselves to it constantly, but rarely do we stop to ask, what exactly am I chasing? Journaling makes that invisible standard visible. Take a page and write down all the things you feel you should be. Maybe it's, I should be more successful by now. I should have more friends. I should be more confident, attractive, fit, or wealthy. Be brutally honest. Let the shoulds spill out. This is your ideal self, the finish line that keeps moving. Then on the other side of the page, write down who you are right now, your real self. Not in judgmental terms, but descriptive ones. I'm someone who is learning. I'm someone who works hard but also struggles with doubt. I'm someone who values honesty even when it costs me. When you see both lists side by side, something shifts. You notice the gap, and awareness of that gap is the first step to closing it. Instead of unconsciously running on the treadmill, you're finally stepping off and asking, do I even want to run this race? Practice unconditional self-regard. This phrase sounds lofty, but it's actually simple, though not easy. Unconditional self-regard means you stop making your worth conditional on your performance. Here's a practice. Whenever you catch yourself thinking, I'm not enough, pause. Notice the voice, then deliberately reframe it. Instead of I failed, so I'm worthless, try I failed, and that means I'm learning. I'm growing, and growth is messy. Even in my imperfection, I'm still worthy. At first, this will feel fake. Your brain is wired with years of self-criticism. But over time, reframing begins to rewrite those neural pathways. You start to internalize a truth you've always struggled to believe. You don't need to punish yourself to become better. You need to accept yourself to become whole. Choose safe relationships. Self-regard doesn't exist in a vacuum. We learn how to treat ourselves largely from how others have treated us. If you grew up around conditional love, it makes sense that you repeat that pattern internally. That's why it's so important to be intentional about who you surround yourself with as an adult. Ask yourself, who in my life makes me feel like I can take off the mask? Who accepts me without conditions? Spend more time with those people. Nurture those relationships. And just as importantly, limit your exposure to people who only value you when you're performing, achieving, or meeting their expectations. You don't have to cut everyone out cold turkey. But notice how their presence affects your inner dialogue. If every time you leave an interaction, you feel smaller, less worthy, less enough, then it's worth asking, is this a voice I need in my life right now? Choosing safe relationships is not selfish. It's survival. It's creating an ecosystem where your real self can breathe. Experiment with authenticity. Here's the brave part. Shrinking the gap between the real and ideal self requires risking authenticity. That means showing up, even in small ways, as who you actually are, not who you think you're supposed to be. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Maybe it's being honest with a friend about how you're really feeling, instead of saying, "I'm fine." Maybe it's wearing something you love, even if it's not on trend. Maybe it's admitting you don't know the answer in a meeting, instead of pretending you do. Each act of authenticity is a small rebellion against the ideal self. It's saying, I don't have to perform to be accepted, I can just be. And with every step, the mask gets a little lighter, the gap gets a little smaller, and life feels a little freer. Build daily rituals of remembrance. Because here's the truth. You will forget. You'll fall back into the old patterns of striving and comparing. That's human. The goal isn't to never forget. The goal is to remember faster. Daily rituals help with that. This could be a sticky note on your mirror that says, "You are already enough." A 5-minute meditation in the morning where you breathe and let yourself simply exist. A nightly gratitude practice where you name 3 things you appreciate about who you are, not what you did. Think of these as anchors that bring you back to Roger's insight. Worth isn't earned, it's inherent. The bigger picture, living this out doesn't mean you'll never struggle again. You will. You'll feel the pull of the ideal self. You'll hear the whispers of not enough. But over time, you'll start to respond differently. Instead of collapsing into the treadmill, you'll smile at the illusion and step off. And here's the paradox. When you stop striving to become and you allow yourself to simply be, growth happens naturally. You don't have to force it. You just have to live it. So if this journey speaks to you, if you're ready to shrink the gap and live from a place of worth instead of performance, then join us. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, because what we're building here is more than a channel. It's a community of people choosing to be human, fully and unapologetically. And that's where true healing begins. So let's circle back to the question that started all of this. Why do I feel like I'll never be good enough? The answer, when you peel it back, is rarely about laziness, weakness, or lack of effort. It's deeper. You feel this way because you've been conditioned over years, maybe decades, to believe that your worth depends on conditions, on performance, on comparison, on approval. Somewhere along the way, you absorb the idea that unless you hit the target, wear the mask, or win the applause, you don't measure up. That's why the never enough voice is so relentless. It doesn't matter how much you accomplish, because the standard always shifts. You finally reach one milestone, and suddenly there's another. You finally get the approval, and then you're terrified of losing it. The finish line keeps moving. That's the trap of conditional worth. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, saw this clearly. He believed the good life isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity, not about becoming someone else's version of enough, but about becoming yourself, fully and unapologetically. And that's the shift most of us never get taught. From the time we're children, we're rewarded when we behave, praised when we achieve, and criticized when we fall short. Without realizing it, we start equating love with performance. We internalize the belief that only a certain version of us is worthy of acceptance. But here's the paradox. The more we try to earn worth, the more it slips through our fingers. Why? Because worth isn't something you achieve. Worth is something you are. Think about that for a moment. What if the endless race to be enough, the striving, the proving, the perfectionism, is actually the very thing keeping you from feeling enough? What if the whole time the race was an illusion, a treadmill designed to exhaust you but never let you arrive? The truth is, you already are enough. Always were. Always will be. You don't need to earn your right to take up space, to be loved, to be seen. The fact that you exist, breathing, alive, human, is proof of your worth. And once you see that, the question starts to change. It's no longer, am I good enough? It becomes, am I willing to believe I already am? That question changes everything. Because when you live as if your worth is conditional, you hide, you perform, you live in fear of rejection. But when you live as if your worth is inherent, you show up differently. You take risks, you speak your truth, you let yourself be seen, even in your flaws and contradictions. And here's the part Rogers emphasized. That's where growth actually happens. Real change, real healing, doesn't come from punishing yourself into the ideal self. It comes from giving yourself the freedom to be, to exist as you are, to embrace your humanity instead of running from it. So maybe the real takeaway isn't about fixing yourself. Maybe it's about remembering yourself. Maybe it's about reconnecting with that part of you that knew long before the world told you otherwise that you were enough just as you are. And if you let that truth in, if you allow it to sink deeper than your fears, deeper than your doubts, then life starts to feel different. The pressure loosens, the inner critic quiets, the endless chase slows down. You begin to realize you don't need to keep proving yourself to earn a seat at the table of humanity. You already belong. So let me ask you again, why do you feel like you'll never be good enough? Because somewhere along the line, you forgot that your worth was unconditional. Because you started chasing someone else's definition of who you should be. Because you believed the lie that only a perfect version of you deserves love. But you don't have to keep believing that story. You can write a new one. Rogers said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." That's the heart of it. Transformation begins not when you hate yourself into improvement, but when you love yourself enough to grow from a place of wholeness. So maybe the question isn't, will I ever be good enough? Maybe the real question is, am I willing to believe that I already am? Because the truth is, you are. You always were. And the journey ahead isn't about earning that truth. It's about remembering it. And if you're ready to keep remembering, if you're ready to keep exploring these deeper questions about what it means to be human, then subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join this community. We're in this together. And together, we're rewriting the story of what it means to live a life that's not about performance, but about authenticity. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to become enough. You already are. Before you click away, I want to leave you with something powerful. Don't just listen to this message, live with it. Take a moment after this video to write down how it made you feel. Did something click? Did it stir up an old memory? Did it give you relief? Or maybe even resistance? Whatever it is, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Because here's the thing. This channel isn't just about me talking at you. We're starting a series where I'll be reading out your real psychological struggles, and together we'll explore them through the lens of different great thinkers, Adler, Rogers, Jung, and others. You'll even be able to choose which psychologist you'd like me to use as a guide for addressing your difficulty. So think of this as more than a video. Think of it as the beginning of a conversation. Share your story, let your voice be heard. And maybe, just maybe, the words you write today will help someone else who feels like they're not enough. And if that resonates with you, subscribe and join us, because this community is about more than content. It's about healing, insight, and the courage to be fully human.